And I'll 100% on what you said. And it's just so impressive. So impressive to me what you guys do with these amazing teachers that you find. It just makes it so straightforward. It lowers the bar and makes it normal for the children to learn, and they won't even appreciate it until a decade from now when they understand how different, when your daughter understands how different her experience is with these languages as compared to her contemporaries who learned them all in a classroom and in that approach. What's fascinating to me is back to rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The smart get smarter. One thing I learned from that book, Peak, that I want you to read by Anders Ericsson, is on a physical, biological level, our brains adapt to the activities that we do. There are at least three different examples that are cited specifically with rigorous laboratory analysis of the brain size of individuals in these studies. One was an amazing study on London taxi drivers that showed that because driving a taxi in London is a highly regulated occupation, as well as requiring an enormous amount of knowledge and skill just to get into it. And so they proved every way possible that when somebody becomes a London cab driver, certain physical parts of the brain grow larger due to the intense navigation and spatial awareness skills that the taxi driver has to develop and use over the course of his career. The second one they proved is mathematicians. People who do math literally grow gray matter in the parts of the brain associated with their mathematical activities. And the third was in musicians. They've demonstrated that musicians' brains physically grow in order to provide more efficient processing. For example, with violinists, if they're left hand, the brain is different than people who are non-violinists or who don't play with their left hand. And so similarly with languages or anything, is that on a physical, biological level, the brain itself will adapt to the learning activity. And I have observed this in my son, my eldest, who's the most linguistically advanced at this point in time. I don't know if I've never measured his brain, but what I have observed is that he is a much better language learner than I am because of now studying his seventh language. And all of this happened in the last 4 years, but he sees connections between words, and affirming what you say about how it's much easier to learn a related Romance language when you've learned one. He sees connections that I would never dream of because he has so many languages now to draw on. He's like, oh, you know what? That root word of that is kind of like this other thing in this other language, so it probably means such and such. And I go and look it up, and it does. And he sees the connections in all the root words because language is a sensible science. We understand how languages develop, how they're formed, and they make sense when you understand them. So when we facilitate this ability, your daughter will find always learning languages to be easier because quite literally the language part of her brain could be measured in a lab to be bigger and for her to be genuinely smarter with more gray matter that is associated with that learning ability.
So I have a question for you, and I think we had talked about it a little bit before, but I want to bring it out in this conversation. Do you think that with traditional education, there is any subject matter which doesn't need to be taught, or it's not that it doesn't need to be taught, it doesn't shape that foundational aspect of being a good human being? Do you think that there are subjects or fields or things that are taught or are brought up in traditional education, which, you know what, we don't really need these? Because I had an opinion about this, and then you started to change my mind in private conversations.
I have an ongoing debate on this topic with my brother. My brother was an extremely smart student academically, always easily the top of his class, no difficulty whatsoever. And he succeeded easily in an academic context. And to his great frustration, none of his academic success has paid off in broad life success. And so he's now philosophically with his children, he homeschools them, but he's philosophically very much in favor of an unschooling philosophy, not requiring all these subjects. He looks at it and says, "Why do you need to study algebra? My knowledge of algebra has never paid off for me. I don't need these kinds of things." And we have this ongoing debate, and I'm trying to understand and think about it, because I also found academics fairly simple and easy for me. I never struggled with it. And I've asked myself, what would I chuck? What would I get rid of? And here is my current thinking on it. And I'd love to visit this in 2 years and we'll see how it changes. But here's my current thinking. Generally speaking, the actual time involved to have a basic exposure to all of the standard subjects of the American high school curriculum, which is the easiest to see, similar in Canada, similar in many places in the world. I don't think the actual amount of time involved is actually difficult. And I'll demonstrate that with a little bit of math that I did. And what I'm saying is, I think that we can do both. So if my brother were arguing against studying the academic subjects, he would say that it's much more important that a student discover an area of interest and passion and develop his skills in that area, and that we not waste time studying biology and chemistry and stuff that he's never going to use, when he could be dedicating that time to developing his great areas of interest. And I say, yes, I definitely want a student to have the time to develop those areas of interest. If we exclusively create an academic education and we do biology and chemistry and physics and algebra and all the stuff, and we don't have that practical component of skills and interests and business skills and things like that, I think we haven't created a well-educated human being. But I also don't think I think we can do both. And this is my bet, is that we can do both with a little bit of time. So back to the time efficiency. My bitterness towards my standard industrial schooling is the opportunity cost. When I think back to the time that I sat in class every day, bored out of my mind, and what I could have done with that if someone had given me better coaching in terms of my entrepreneurial skills or skills that I was interested in or developing my career, I'm ashamed of what a waste it was. It was an enormous waste. But back to, remember what I said, most homeschoolers in like the elementary and middle school years find that they can do in about 2 hours of class what it generally takes a school 7 hours to do. So my model at the moment, my anticipation, again, my eldest is only 10, so I reserve the right to always change based upon the individual success and needs of an individual child and where we are this year. But my model, my ambition is this. I want my children to have the full academic structure, the full academic complement of classes. I want them to have that. I want them to be skilled and have a basic high school education in biology and chemistry and physics and English and history, American history, and all the stuff. And I want them to have that. And I think that we can probably do that in about 3 or 4 hours a day. That to me seems appropriate, that if a child spends, say, from 8 a.m. to noon every day doing academics with all of that other like attractive stuff that I talked about, good learning science, I think that child can be a superstar in academics and also have plenty of time to pursue interests and program computers and write code and do videos and do entrepreneurship, all the stuff. We've got plenty of time. Remember, children have enormous amounts of time because we as parents provide everything for them, and their only job is to learn. And so I've done some math on this. And for example, if you take an average high school textbook for, say, a biology textbook, and you record it, I think I found some recordings of it, and it was something like 40 hours or so of tape, call it 40 to 50 hours. And if somebody is well-versed in the fields of biology, and it's not just totally new, and you just go through a standard biology textbook one time, and let's say you have an audio recording of it and you read with your eyes while reading with your ears, or maybe you read with your eyes one time and you read with your ears another time, then let's call it 90 hours at a maximum amount. There's a biology class. And that method of education is extremely efficient, much more efficient than even sitting in class. Let me do some more math that I did. I calculated one time how long it took me to get through 1 hour of audiobook listening at standard 1x speed. So not 3x, just 1x. And if memory is correct, it was something like 11,000 words per hour. Then I calculated how much time, let's say you have a 1 hour class in high school. How much time, how many words does a teacher actually deliver in a classroom? I'm a pretty skilled public speaker, but when I'm speaking, even if I know what I'm talking about, like I'm doing right now, I'm speaking extemporaneously. I probably speak at a rate of, say, 8,000 words an hour. And in those 8,000 words, it's not as much as audiobook if I'm reading, but in those 8,000 words, I repeat, I go back, there's inefficiencies. So let's say you have a very skilled high school teacher that can teach at 8,000 words per hour. Then let's assume how much time is a teacher actually teaching verbally in classroom. And let's say you have a 1 hour class. I'm going to guess you might get, say, 40 minutes out of 60 for a very good teacher. The best case scenario.
Yeah, you're being pretty generous, but okay.
I'm doing my best. I'm trying to steel man this, not straw man it. So 10 minutes at the beginning, 10 minutes at the end, messed up, disciplinary things, stupid questions. Let's say a teacher delivers 6,000 words per hour or 5,500 for easy math. A student with a textbook and an audio textbook, just reading along while listening, which is a powerful learning technique, has twice the efficiency as the class. And that's to say nothing of all of the wasted days that are lost of 180 school day year of hurricane days or snow days and all the rest of the stuff. So the actual amount of content covered in, say, a high school biology class is probably 50 to 100 hours of actual learning. Now, what I've done is I've said, how can we make that even more efficient? So I'll give a practical example using physics with what I'm doing in my homeschool right now. I want my capstone accomplishment, what I intend, subject to all the disclaimers I said earlier, is that my children will take either the AP physics exam, all of them, the A, B, C, D, and E, or C and D, but the AP physics exams or something like a physics A levels in the British system, something like that. And that's going to be their capstone performance that I expect at, say, 16 or 17 years old. This is when you're going to graduate out of Joshua's physics class. So, but we can prepare for that long in advance. We don't have to wait and then just do 1 year of physics. Because what we know is that when we wait and do 1 year of physics, it's too much content all at a time. It's very inefficient, and it's hard to learn all that. So we want to do interleaving all the way through. And so what I have done is I have tried to interleave physics all the way through. So here are three specific examples. Number one is I found a math curriculum called Life of Fred that I love. And what's so amazing about Life of Fred is he teaches math always with stories. He created this ridiculous character that always needs a math concept and these absurd harebrained stories and adventures that the children love. They read these math books for fun, and then we learn math along it. But he has in his pre-algebra curriculum, he has pre-algebra with physics. And so he's teaching pre-algebra with physics concepts. That's step one. The second step of physics is that I found these really great cartoon introduction guides to things that this guy writes. So I have a book called Cartoon Introduction Guide to Physics. And what the author of that does is he takes all the basic concepts of a subject, of chemistry, of physics, of economics, and he writes cartoons of them, a cartoon story. And these stories are pretty simple, but they teach the big concepts. And they teach them in an engaging way. It takes 20 minutes to read a chapter. It works. The third resource that I found is the physics teacher that I love most in the world is a man named Walter Lewin, something like that, a Harvard physics professor. He has these incredible physics lectures on YouTube. And he wrote this book called For the Love of Physics, which is a fascinating, passionate engagement with physics. And so what I do is I take all these resources and I put them into my 10-year-old's curriculum. And they're all perfectly age appropriate, but we spread them out. So we spread them out over a long time. And we do one chapter from the cartoon introduction guide to physics per week. And so that's 20 minutes per week on physics. And then we have the pre-algebra book, and we do a different day. We do 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the For the Love of Physics books. So by the time we arrive at that capstone high school physics textbook that's going to be super technical, then my student is already going to have a deep connection with the concepts of physics proven out many times, which means all we need to do is go through the textbook one time, do some practice problems, some revisions, some tests, and then sit for the exam. And so the actual time efficiency of this on the whole should be pretty efficient. And so I really, ask me in 10 years and I'll give you the report, but I don't believe we have to choose. I think that academic competence, barring some kind of innate biological learning disability, academic competence is largely a product of environment, which is why those first years are so important, because the skill of reading is something that has to be built up with hours and hours and hours of reading. Most of that can be pleasure reading, but if what I observed in high school was the students who couldn't read their textbook were the same students that never read. And so if you just read and read and read and read as a young child, then reading becomes so, you have such automaticity with reading that you can read a textbook with no problem. Then also this kind of what I described as the surface area of the subject, if you've been exposed to the subject over time and in physics, we can't do physics with world travel, but we can do physics with traveling the universe with concepts, and we make it engaging with our best living books and the highest quality things, that by the time we arrive at a high school physics class, we can go ahead and devote 40 hours to this over the course of, say, a year, and do the math, right? 40 hours over the course of a year is less than an hour a week. If we do school 40, well, let's just say we do school 40 hours a week, 40 weeks a year, because I presume I don't carve it so much into the strange school terms. So let's say we do school 40 weeks a year. That's an hour a week. We split that into 3 sessions, and 3 days a week we do 20 minutes of physics. We can pass the AP physics exam pretty easily. What we're going against in the school system is astonishingly low performance. And so I think that with all of these kind of foundational skills built up, I see no reason why a normal student can't be highly competent with academics, have the full course of standard subjects, while also having abundant amounts of time and abundant resources that are poured into particular areas of interest, particular entrepreneurship, or whatever it happens to be, to fit him for his career, his financial success, and anything else that he desires to pursue.